Thank you, John Corlett. Taoiseach, the mortgage arrears crisis shows no signs of abating. We've heard at the weekend of very significant disagreement between the financial regulator and the banks in relation to the content of what a sustainable resolution of mortgage arrears is, and also in terms of the pace of progress being made by the banks themselves. Now, the economic impact of the mortgage arrears crisis is very, very severe. It is hammering consumer confidence and it's undermining any prospect of a recovery in the domestic economy. We now have over 95,000 people in arrears for over 90 days. And your decision to amend the Code of Conduct fundamentally places a very substantial number, over half of those in a serious situation vis-à-vis the banks and any approaches the banks might make. And there is a genuine fear out there about an impending wave of repossessions of family homes. And people are very, very worried indeed. Banks are meant, Taoiseach, to have already offered up to 20% of that, or to achieve the 20% target in terms of providing sustainable solutions to people in mortgage arrears. You might update me in terms of the degree to which that target, due to be reached at the end of June, was met, and 50% by the end of this year. Now, we've put a motion this evening as a party to be constructive here, and we're calling on the government to substantially amend the Code of Conduct so as to give greater protections to those in arrears. To, for example, establish a clear definition of what constitutes an unsustainable mortgage.
Question, please.
To ensure a minimum protected level of income for people in arrears. To reinstate the 12-month moratorium in relation to the commencement of repossession proceedings. To ensure, Taoiseach, that all banks would have their calls with those who are borrowing from them recorded, so that those calls could be stored, lest there be any accusations of aggressive and unacceptable behaviour. And finally, Taoiseach, that an obligation on banks seeking, in order for a repossession, to first obtain written confirmation from the central bank that had exhausted every other course of action available to keep a family in their home. So, Taoiseach, I'm going to put it to you, do you not accept that it's now time for the government to directly intervene to offer protection to those in mortgage arrears? And can you outline to us the nature of the disagreement between the financial regulator and the banks? And can you outline what you believe a sustainable resolution is in this context?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Sustainable resolution is to arrive at a situation whereby a person currently in mortgage distress or mortgage arrears has an agreement with the lender that person in that situation can be sustainable. In other words, that they can meet the requirements over a period in a different set of circumstances. You raised two issues, actually, Deputy Martin, both the arrears and the progress being made by banks on mortgage, on restructuring of mortgages. When you say that it's time for the government to get involved here, the government have got involved for quite some time. In fact, if there had been involvement before, we certainly wouldn't have the mess that we have now. All of the tools, as I said before, are now in place to have the accelerated workout of mortgage arrears put in place. Banks and borrowers are now required to use these tools to reach a fair and a sustainable and an affordable solution to mortgage arrears. I know, and you know, the pressure that this causes on people everywhere around the country. There's been no doubt at all, and we've all said this, that over the last number of years there has been completely insufficient activity. And that's why the central bank announced their new targets, and that's why they will be strictly monitored. That's why they will be strictly enforced, so that banks can reach sustainable solutions for families in mortgage arrears. Governor Honohan set out the conditions here, and that he expected to see the recommendations in from banks against the performance of the targets that have been set. As I've already said, if the central bank were to require further powers, then government will always be available to deal with that. As at the end of March of this year, Deputy Martin, there were 79,689 mortgage accounts were categorised as restructured. 53% of those were not in arrears at the end of Q1. and as a percentage of the total stock in arrears, both early and 90 days plus, 37,454, or 26%, were classified as restructured. This does not suggest that 47% have fallen back into arrears, because restructured accounts in arrears include accounts that were in arrears prior to restructuring, where the balance in arrears had not been eliminated, as well as accounts that are in arrears on the current restructuring arrangement. The public targets obviously have the following elements. Quarterly targets have been set in relation to the number of sustainable solutions actually proposed to customers. The application of the targets commenced at the end of Quarter 2, 2013, and be enhanced in subsequent quarters, with 2014 set to be targets to be set in due course. Now, it's expected that 50% would have restructured proposals dealt with by the end of this year, and the remainder by 2014. Progressively more demanding quarterly targets at Ceann Comhairle will be set for the conclusion of the sustainable solutions. I want to make it perfectly clear, Deputy Martin, there is no setting targets about repossession of homes. That has to be the last resort, and the conditions set out here state that very clearly. These targets are demanding, and they are deliberately set to be demanding, and they're designed to ensure that the vast majority of families in this country will be offered solutions that do not require or that do not involve house repossessions. We all know how important that is.
Thank you. Deputy Martin,
you didn't quite answer the questions that I asked you. The fundamental question I asked you: would you accept the proposals that we're putting tonight in relation to strengthening the code of conduct in order to protect those in mortgage arrears? And I listed, I'm not going to do it now with the limited time available, I listed a whole series of constructive steps that we believe should be taken to protect those in arrears and give genuine protection. Why? Because we believe your only intervention to date has been designed with the Central Bank to facilitate more repossessions of family homes. There's no other way of assessing the situation other than that. I mean, the Land and Conveyancing Bill has been changed to facilitate repossessions without conditions. You've diluted many of the protections that were in the former Code of Conduct in relation to the banks, the level of contact with customers and much, much more. You've reduced those entitled to mortgage subsidy. So the entire agenda has been to put those families in arrears in further jeopardy in terms of the relationship with the banks. And there's a considerable disconnection, Taoiseach, a disconnect between official utterances and from what you're saying and the reality on the ground has been experienced by people in mortgage arrears, particularly those with equity in their houses, by the way, who the banks seem to be adopting a more aggressive approach to, notwithstanding the fact that they have the capacity to get involved in split mortgages and so on. And one statistic that speaks for itself: only 140 plus split mortgages, Taoiseach. That is all in the last 2 years that have been achieved. I mean, that sums up really the inertia, the lack of action, and the degree to which the problem has become much worse. Could I ask you, Taoiseach, on the targets? You didn't answer me. What percentage of has been achieved in terms of sustainable solutions by the end of June? It was meant to be 20%. What actually is the figure?
Thank you.
Well, it will be 2 weeks before the Central Bank is able to publish the adherence by the banks to the targets that have been set by the Central Bank. I don't have that information, and it won't be available for about 2 weeks, Deputy Martin. Yes, I do. Unlike what I heard when I was in here before for many years. We can't leave 100,000 families locked into limbo here, and that's why the government have put in place a very comprehensive programme of action to assist householders who are struggling here. And that goes, obviously, we had long discussions about the insolvency arrangements here, bankruptcy being the ultimate mechanism that applies here. There is no strategy or no policy in respect of forcing householders to have their homes repossessed, and it's not in your keeping to make comments like that. Everybody recognises the value. Everybody recognises, well, it's not your normal practice, shall we say. Everybody recognises the value of the family home in this country, more so than most other countries, and we want that to be the very end of that. And I know you accept that. I know that you accept that.
Thank you.
The strategy by government was set out in five different points, and I've given you those before, Deputy. Comprehensive advice and assistance, introducing the innovative new measures for dealing with these cases, rebalancing personal insolvency legislation, introduction of measures to assist families to stay in the home, if at all possible, and challenging the banks to live up to their responsibilities in this crisis with the speedy rollout of their own range of situations here. So I hope that in 2 weeks' time, when the Central Bank does publish the evidence from the banks, let's see have they lived up to their targets that have been set, because these targets will become progressively more strict and more detailed in